Hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the podcast that is beginning to wonder if voting for Keir Starmer was such a great idea after all. I'm Ben Ronnie Heathington. I'm joined by Adam Spears. Adam, should I have voted for the Lib Dems instead?
I will never advocate for voting for the Lib Dems.
To be clear, the correct answer to that is no.
But if someone had a gun to your head and they were like, are you going to vote Labour or are you going to vote Lib Dem? Just let them pull the trigger.
Pull the fucking trigger, yeah! Just for the avoidance of all doubt, I did not vote for the Labour Party at the last election. It is the first election of my lifetime.
Lib Dem?
The first election of my lifetime. I was legally allowed to vote in and did not vote.
Is it really?
Yeah. I have always voted either Green or Labour.
Hang on, I'm really confused. You just said it was the first election of your lifetime you were legally allowed to vote.
And didn't vote.
Oh, and didn't vote. I was like, how does that work? Yeah. How are the numbers working?
I recently turned 18. I look so bad for my age. No, I didn't. I bought my ballot, which is the first general election I've ever done that for. I've always either voted Green or Labour.
It's the right thing to do.
But
it's the right thing to do.
And to be fair, we were in a safe seat for Labour, and I was like, hey, I'm not asking much, but I'll vote for anyone who is supportive of trans rights and refugee rights. So I voted for no one because of the state of the British political system.
To be fair, the Greens are doing a lot better on both those things now.
Yeah. I mean, they're always quite good on the refugee stuff. They just had a bit of a turf problem that they seem to have mostly sorted.
Yeah, they're getting. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the hope will be that Zach Polanski is elected leader, rather than, what's his face, the guy who looks a bit like Rory Stewart.
Which I totally agree with, but are we aware of the Polanski hypnotism story?
Yeah.
And look, I want a leader of the country who can hypnotise women to make their breasts larger. You know? Like, if that is a possibility, why have we been mucking around with prime ministers not able to do that? That's what I want to know.
I mean, this is serious Boris Johnson energy. Do you remember when he genuinely said voting Tory will increase your chances of owning a BMW M3 and make your breasts larger or something? You've got to hand it to him. He's he belongs. I mean, obviously, I don't believe in prison, but he belongs in prison. However, you know, he is charismatic, which makes him more dangerous, in my opinion. Like, that's why everyone voted for him, right?
Yeah. Same thing as with Trump, but possibly even more so. Like, you know, you can't deny Trump is funny, like, and often on purpose as well as accidentally. Like, he is a catty little bitch, and it is funny at times.
He is a catty little bitch. I don't know if I've ever found him funny though.
Oh, okay. At the very least, accidentally, he's been funny. Do you remember when he told that child, "Do you still believe in Santa Claus? Because at your age it's marginal." That's funny. You can't.
That is funny, to be fair.
Really good stuff. Obviously, terrible man, terrible politics, hate what he's doing, but much like Boris Johnson, you have to give credit where credit is due, however small that credit is.
This is the inevitable Bread and Rosaries, like, lurch to the right.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say it's the split that we split over whether Donald Trump is funny or not.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
So that was enough frivolity, because we are going to talk about something quite depressing today. We're going to talk about, well, as always, we're going to talk about something depressing, but particularly this time, we're going to talk about Palestine Action and the potential banning of Palestine Action, prescribing of them. So whilst you listen to this episode, whilst we record this episode, I should say, it is currently legal. By the time you listen to this episode, you may well be listening to contraband material, depending on how things go.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that we're going to get this turned around and actually release it slightly earlier than usual so that we are within the date.
Yeah.
But like, I can't guarantee that. There's almost certainly going to be something that would get us arrested after that date, though, I should think.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Before we get into that, though, let us talk, as always, about what is on our mind grapes.
What else is on my mind grapes?
So what's on my mind grapes is a comment from Taylor on our Spotify from about 3 months ago. I don't even know you could comment on Spotify, so don't blame me that we didn't notice till now. But Taylor says, I'd be curious to hear more about your reaction to how assisted dying has been implemented in Canada and its parallel to the UK bill. My PhD work is in suicide and seeing how capitalism would love for us to die rather than putting funding towards poverty, etc. And disability advocates in Canada is what has driven me to be very wary of assisted dying as a concept. My body, my choice is, of course, important, but I feel like capitalism muddies things. And that last bit, I think we can all get behind. We've toyed with doing a full assisted dying episode and haven't got round to it because it's quite complicated. And I don't know the ins and outs of the Canadian bill. But I think it is interesting, in the week where, or week just gone even, the assisted dying bill has passed through the House of Commons. It's not law yet because it's got to go through the House of Lords again, I believe, but it is fast looking like we will have assisted dying being legalised in the UK. Personally, I totally understand people's wariness of it, but I think that's a good thing. I think assisted dying in the abstract is a question of bodily autonomy, and I think you have to support bodily autonomy. I understand people's concerns about capitalism and this shower of shit that we have for a government, but I don't think that you can just shoot down a positive step forward because we still have capitalism. Otherwise, we'd never get anything done. And I think what really convinced me on the assisted dying bill is seeing the people who oppose it. And I don't know if you remember this, but Esther Ranson basically said that people with undeclared religious beliefs were opposing the bill, and people got really upset about it, but she was dead on the money. There are a bunch of right-wing Christians who are pummeling money into opposing assisted dying because they are pro-life. And I think the big revealing thing for me was when a bunch of people who had kind of become known for their opposition to assisted dying also got really upset the other week when abortion was decriminalised up to birth.
There's something really interesting about those two things, though, as well, because, I get mailings in my inbox from various organisations, including the sort of big UK Christian ones like Premier and whatever. And there is just a widespread assumption. There's not really any questioning about whether these things are good or bad or whatever. It is, they are bad. There's no nuance. There's no discussion. It is campaigning at this point, right? Premier and others are campaigning to stop these things happening. And I find that really interesting because they don't generally do that on other topics. On other topics, they'll allow a little bit of, this person believes this person believes this, but these are just taken as read that they're bad.
Yeah.
It's not even that they're kind of saying every Christian must disagree with this. They're saying that every Christian does disagree with this.
Yeah, exactly. I think, we know the history of the Christian right in the States is that they essentially picked abortion as a topic that they could rally around politically to get Christians to vote for right-wing politicians. It wasn't, prior to that point, anything that was particularly important to the average evangelical Christian in the States, but the religious right very successfully made it a central plank. And I think pro-life politics is still a central tool used to recruit Christians to vote for right-wing parties. So I do understand people's concerns about assisted dying. I think that there are some reasons to be skeptical, but I do think that the religious right has run a really effective smear campaign against the assisted dying bill. One of the things that's been doing around a lot is all the things that have been rejected by the proponent of the bill, Kim Ledbetter, and almost every single one of them is a wrecking amendment designed to make the bill unworkable but look like it's a serious attempt to make things safer or better. There's one about, ensuring that there is mental capacity to give consent. And people are going, well, why would they not want that? And the answer is, we already have a law for that. If you're making a medical procedure legal for doctors to do, you don't need to add that they need to be mentally capable of consenting to that, because that is already the legal system in which it exists. And there's just a bunch of examples like that where they've put in amendments designed to look like they're trying to do things better, but actually are just a way of slowing down the bill or trying to make it unworkable in legal practice. And then the Christian right have pushed these ideas to say, look how awful and evil this bill is.
I'm going to push back a little bit, though, because I do think Taylor makes a valid point here, because there are issues in the way that it's been implemented in Canada specifically. And those issues do boil down to issues around capitalism as well. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. There are cases of people who have asked to die and therefore given their consent, that is bodily autonomy, to die effectively because they live in poverty and can't get out of it. And maybe one might argue that you can't have a law allowing assisted dying under capitalism that's going to be perfect. That's never going to happen. But unless you sort out that poverty element of it as well, you are going to have serious problems. And you can make the same case for mental health as well. There was a case in, is it Belgium, where they have it as well, somewhere like that, where a young woman decided to end her life through this process because she had really poor mental health. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but they decided that there was no foreseeable way forward. There was no way that she could ever have good mental health good enough that it was worth her living. And she did indeed get the right to die. And I feel so uncomfortable with that. So uncomfortable, particularly in this country where mental health provision is in the toilet, frankly. I mean, all health provision in this country is in the toilet right now, but especially mental health provision. So, that is another case. And I think you're right. This is a case of bodily autonomy and we have to back that. But we have to be so careful about not dismissing these when they are argued in good faith.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, is that there are some real concerns, particularly about actually what could happen in the future, because I think it's important to note that the assisted dying bill as it exists is only for terminally ill people. Now, could that change? Sure, potentially. And I'm open to opposing certain changes that might be made at a point in the future, particularly if, as you say, they seem to be about allowing people to take their own life because they're suffering under capitalism. So yeah, I totally agree there is a legitimate argument there. I'm not convinced it's an argument against the bill as it exists. The other thing that I've seen a lot of, and really annoyed me, is again the Christian right saying, well, disabled people don't support the bill. Actually, it's bad for disability, it's bad for disabled people. And I find this really fascinating, because the reason they say this is that a number of the major disability charities in the UK have opposed the bill because they feel like it's not workable as it is. However, it is also clear that a large majority of disabled people support assisted dying, and that disabled people are more likely than non-disabled people to support assisted dying. And I think it's an interesting thing to consider how we have a situation where the major disability organisations are not actually representing the majority view of disabled people, and how that is then being used to push a untrue narrative by the Christian right.
I think that's a good point. I would also say, though, that there is, again, an issue around capitalism. You can apply a lot of the same arguments I've made around mental health to social care in this country. Social care is in the toilet. All of our public services are basically in the toilet. That's the problem.
Good news.
It's kind of rubbish right now to live in the UK for the most part. And
it's been hot. That's what really gets me.
Just shouldn't be allowed, should it? Yeah.
It's a beautiful country with the perfect ecosystem, and we've ruined it. Global warming making it too hot to be in the UK. It's sick. I hate it. Continue. That was just my rant about the UK.
I mean, I'm fine. I mean, you did sound like you were going on some kind of Faragian style rant for a second there. So you're going to start running to be.
Yeah, you've already accused me of doing the right wing turn, so I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah,
committing
that's true,
to it.
Abortions for all. Very well. No abortions for anyone. Abortions for some, miniature American flags for others.
So, let us move on to talking a little bit about Palestine Action. For those of you that have been living... and that is the first example of criminal air horns on this podcast.
Yeah, it's sent to prison for air horns.
So what I'm planning to do is recount some facts that are indisputable and allow you to say the stuff that's potentially going to become illegal to say.
Okay, you do that.
And that's going to be my legal defence, is I just said some facts. Facts like Palestine Action are entirely in the right. You know, just basic facts. For those of you who live under a rock, Palestine Action are a direct action organisation. Something that surprised me when I was researching them is that they've only been around 6 years or so.
If that, yeah.
We'll talk about Yvette Cooper's statement later, but one thing I did notice is she referred to them having a long history of actions. And I was like, well, if they've only been around 6 years, that's not really a long history, is it? Like, it kind of feels like you don't know what you want about, but we'll get to that idea. They primarily focus on Elbit systems. So rather than focusing on kind of influencing the government or anything like that, they're focusing on Elbit system, which is a major supplier of Israeli armaments. Just to give you a bit of an idea of them, I'm going to read some bits off their website. So they say, we are a direct action movement committed to ending global participation in Israel's genocidal and apartheid regime. Using disruptive tactics, Palestine Action targets corporate enablers of the Israeli military-industrial complex and seeks to make it impossible for those companies to profit from the oppression of Palestinians. Palestine Action takes strategic, sustained and focused direct action against key targets in order to maximize disruption against key pillars of Israel's military-industrial complex. We do not appeal to politicians or anyone else to create the necessary changes, as we understand the depth of complicity within most global institutions. Rather than begging those who are complicit to gain a moral compass, we go straight to the source and shut down the production of Israeli weapons. And my God, does that last sentence go hard. That is such a great summation of what they're saying. Actually, you can't trust the majority of global institutions. You certainly can't trust the UK government to have a moral compass. So they are taking direct action themselves to, in whatever small way they can, prevent a genocide from happening.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this is the language that they're using, the way they're talking, shows you that they're a really quite radical group. Now, I'm not saying that they're radical in a way that liberals should be particularly scared of as such, because they're a non-violent direct action group. But they are a group that I think if you scratch beneath the surface, they're going to have, their members are going to be politically radical. They're going to be politically very left-wing. And what I find amazing about this is that the government seems to think that hitting this group with a sledgehammer is going to do anything other than just bolster its numbers. Because these kinds of people don't respond to threats of being banned by going, oh, well, we better shut down then.
I mean, if they're scared of the government and reprisals from the government, they wouldn't do any of the things they do. It's kind of built in to the structure of the thing that to be part of it requires you not to care about the government, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, you can see that in their response to this. You can see it in how they talk about what it is that they do. This is the first step in why this is such a nonsensical thing to do.
So the reason they're in the news is a couple of activists associated with them broke into RAF Bryce Norton, which is the largest...
Sorry, it just needs more criminal air horns. I
just want to clarify, you're not doing the air horns for RAF Bryce Norton, are you?
No. Breaking into...
So, two activists... Two activists broke into the RAF base. This is a base where there are regular flights going out to an RAF base in Cyprus, which is used as a base of operations for nothing. We're not doing anything to help the Israelis out. How dare you even suggest that?
We're not even in Cyprus. That would be colonization, wouldn't it? And we're not there.
So the RAF is running recon missions over Gaza for the Israelis. We know that for a fact. We can see that the planes are running over Gaza.
Well, they admitted it, apart from anything. So, we know they did. They're doing it because they said they are.
They shouldn't have done, but they did actually admit it. This is an airbase involved indirectly but fairly clearly with the genocide in Gaza. These two activists broke in and they had repurposed some fire extinguishers to spray red paint representing the blood of Palestinians all over these planes. They got around on, was it electric scooters? Yeah. So to avoid security, left the Palestine flag and got the hell out of Dodge. And let's be really clear about why this has been cracked down on so heavily. It's really fucking embarrassing for the British state and the RAF that two mad lads on electric scooters popped in to the biggest airbase in the country and knocked out two of the most expensive aircraft. It's so bad.
It's genuinely hilarious. And it's the fact that, the sort of mad kind of tantrums that politicians and right wingers and stuff are actually having now over this, because it was two mad lads, as you put it, with repurposed fire extinguishers and electric scooters breaking into a military base to put planes out of action, if only briefly. And now they're claiming that they're being funded by Iran and stuff.
Yeah, I know, that was really good. If they
were being funded by Iran, do you think they'd repurpose fucking fire extinguishers?
I also really enjoyed, there was a few people saying, well, where do they get the expertise to repurpose fire extinguishers? What are you talking about? They just chuck some red paint in a fire extinguisher. This is not a complicated process.
Also, but also, though, this is something that people on the right will never understand. But when you have existed and moved through left-wing, radical, protesty, direct action-y spaces, that kind of knowledge is there. It's in the ether. It's in that community because they've had it for years. It's decades because they've experienced it and they've tried different things, right? Where did they get the expertise? Well, their mates told them,
right. Yeah.
That's just how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this is an old, repurposed fire extinguishers is not a new thing they've invented, right? Electric scooters are relatively new, but I can see that being a great way of zipping around.
Where did they get the expertise to ride those scooters, Ben? That's what I want to know.
As someone who finds riding an electric scooter extraordinarily difficult, that is a reasonable question, I think. But
they're pretty dangerous when it's autumn and there's leaves on the ground and stuff.
I can't balance on them.
Oh, really?
I took an electric scooter home once just to try it, and I got home and it wasn't that hot, and I was just soaked in sweat and exhausted because I found it so. It was far less. Would have been far less tiring to bike. I hate them.
That's so weird to me. I mean, I was going to say that, I'm a motorcyclist, so I'm used to having to balance and stuff. But you're saying that it would be easier to cycle.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
maybe we'll try them another time when I'm there and record, because I kind of want to see this.
Yeah, one of the reasons I don't use a motorcycle is that I think I would just die. So yes, people lost their minds over this stuff, and as I say, I'm absolutely convinced it's because it's so embarrassing that two people with relatively limited, this was not a big, clever operation. It wasn't, Ocean's 11 or anything. Cut a fence, jumped in, sprayed some planes, and got the hell out of Dodge.
Terrorists.
And apparently, that makes them terrorists.
14 years in prison. That's what they deserve. I mean, there is something that's I know this is it's a scary time in a lot of ways. It really is, because this is mad. But there's also just that bit of it watching all of these politicians and people just losing their minds over this that is really quite funny.
Yeah, I think you've got to laugh at some of this stuff, right? Because what else can you do? But yeah.
I watched a parliamentary debate where, what's his name, who's like the minister for the armed forces or whatever he is. What's his name? Luke Pollard, his name?
Yeah.
And he gave a statement, and then there was obviously the debate. And I would say like 90% of the people who stood up to speak, and it wasn't a full house, but 90% of the people who stood up on both sides of the house were just talking about how this is criminal and this, and quite a lot of them were like, they're saboteurs, and just the language that they were using, it was really unhinged. It was so odd to see. Like, and you can expect it from Tories, but this was people from the Lib Dems, from the SNP, from Labour.
And the Lib Dems is arguing that, and I'm not surprised by Labour, and I'm not massively surprised by Lib Dems, but they were the most likely ones of the kind of three big boys, or four if you include SNP, to, they have a bit of a history of having, a liberal approach to human rights and the right to protest or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, with the exception of the Greens and the Independents.
Yeah, I mean, at least the Greens, so the Greens stood up. There were two Green members there who stood up and obviously challenged this as best they could. Obviously, Jeremy Corbyn was there because, of course, he was. And there was one other Labour MP, a backbencher.
Nadia Whittome?
No. Can't remember her name. But, whoever she is, hats off to her, because she was quite vociferously against it as well. And then another Labour MP who was closer to the front clearly was addressing her when she was talking, and was just almost, you could see her shaking with anger. And this was the kind of, because the way people are going to receive this, it's messing with, we talk sometimes about civic religion. We talk about patriotism and nationalism and the flag and the military as being all tied into this idea of civic religion. And if you mess with people's civic religion, you are messing with something that they feel is a fundamental part of their humanity, of who they are as a person. And so you could see these people on all sides of the house visibly angry, shaking, some of them, because these people are dared. Not only these people are dared to break in and attack and apparently put the country at risk because they were attacking defense infrastructure. Defense is an interesting term there. But they were angry at those who even questioned the idea that these were terrorists, visibly shaking and angry. And I find that absolutely fascinating and terrifying in equal measure.
Do you think they are legitimately angry, or do you think it's political theatre?
No, I think they are. I think they're angry. I think there's always an element of political theatre anyway, but I do think that when you attack something, or and by attack I could mean anything from saying, well, I'm not sure about this element of what the armed forces do here, but when you bring into question or you directly go against the military of this country, for so many people that feels almost personal. And so I genuinely think that these people, I think they are legitimately, not legitimately as in I think they've got good reason to be, but I think they are angry, and I think they've got good reason to be.
Yeah, I think in some ways it doesn't matter that much, because if they are doing political theatre, they're doing it because they believe that's what people want to see and hear, which is almost scarier than if they're just doing it not caring what people think.
Yeah, as I say, that stuff does exist, and perhaps there's more political theatre for the Labour Party because, they are seen as the left-wing party, so they want to try and do some of that political theatre to win people's votes and so on. But this is such a right-wing version of the Labour Party at this point that I don't think there's really a whole lot of difference between their responses, actually. Obviously, we know on some level that there's not a whole lot of difference between any political party in the Western Hemisphere, certainly. But I think we're at a point now where certainly the two main parties, as they are at the moment, are so closely related to each other that on 90% of issues, they just have more or less exactly the same response.
Yeah, you really saw how little difference there was between the two major parties, really, and actually throw in Lib Dems and SNP and the rest of them, with the exception of the Greens and Independents.
And look, the SNP and the Lib Dems were slightly softer, but they were still framing it in a way that was like, this was an appalling attack and so on. And actually, what was really fascinating, I mean, shows you how boring a lot of these parliamentary debates can be, because you just have the same questions coming up over and over and over again. And the question that they kept bringing up, all of these different MPs from all different parties kept just asking Luke Pollard, what provisions are you putting in place for other military places or other things to make sure this can't happen again? That was the question that preoccupied almost all of them, actually.
I think the other thing that's interesting to talk about is that everyone is acting as though a crime has been committed. And there were actually a solid legal basis to question whether that's the case. There have been cases in the past, including the case of several people who broke into RAF Fairford with the intention of vandalising American airplanes there. And they were caught, and they argued that although the actions themselves were unlawful, they were in order to stop an illegal war, which was a far greater crime, or war crime, and therefore they were justified. And actually, they were not successfully prosecuted.
Who made that argument, Ben?
Interesting. Let me just check my notes here. Someone called Sir Keir Starmer.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow, he sounds like a great guy. Are we going to give him an air horn? Or?
Yeah. So Starmer himself actually represented people who broke into an airbase in order to stop planes flying to Iraq, and argued that they were not breaking the law, or that their actions were justifiable in order to stop war crimes being committed.
But this is why they want to introduce, partly why they want to introduce this, though, right? Because if you can introduce a law that makes it illegal to be a member of that group or to support that group in any way in the first place, it doesn't matter what you actually do. All that matters is what you think and how you express that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the government are moving to do. They're moving to what's called prescribe Palestine Action, which would make it not only illegal to be a member, but also illegal to publicly support them in any way, which is why we keep joking about this being an illegal episode.
Yeah, so we really need to get all of our public support of Palestine Action out of the way right now.
Yeah, while it's still legal to do so.
Yeah. So we salute you, Palestine Action, and we are with you all the way until Monday.
Absolutely.
I think it's Monday, isn't it? Yeah. At which point you are
know.
terrorists,
Yeah,
and we hate you. We what's the thing that all the far right say when you ask them whether they agree with X, Y, or Z group? Disavow.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we will be disavowing Palestine Action
Absolutely, 100%. But
right
for now,
it's legal.
legends.
So yeah,
love them.
I think something's interesting to note. So it would brand them a terrorist group. Other groups have been prescribed are the likes of National Front and ISIS.
Boko Haram.
Yeah.
This is the thing. This is the thing that's so funny. It's like ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, Palestine Action.
But yes, it is funny and stupid and absurd, really. But I also think it's worth noting that by the letter of the law, there is an argument that you could brand Palestine Action a terrorist organisation.
Yeah, because they wrote the law to be deliberately vague, right?
Yeah.
That's why they did it, so that they could do this. And this is the thing, is that organisations like Amnesty International, they said at the time, this law is too vague and will be used in the future to do this exact kind of thing. And sure enough, it has.
So Amnesty did put a statement out, and this is the final paragraph of it. Government embarrassment at security breaches is no proper basis for excessive and disproportionate interferences with human rights. It is precisely this kind of unlawful government action that critics of the UK terrorism laws warned would come one day. And that's exactly it, right? They're bad laws. I still think that Palestine Action have a case that the law should not apply to them. that it should not be possible to prescribe them as a terrorist organisation on the basis of the right to free speech and all the kind of human rights stuff. And I would encourage people, we'll link it in the show notes, but they are currently fundraising towards their legal defence against being prescribed. And if you have some money, I would heartily encourage you to donate to that. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Go buy their hoodies whilst you still can as well.
Yeah. But these are bad laws that were always designed with the possibility of using them to crack down on political dissent rather than actually just being used for genuinely terrorist organisations.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, when they write laws like this, and they, at the time, they say, oh, well, it's not going to be used in that way. You don't know who's going to be in government in 20 years' time. You don't. You know, I mean, we do now, because Nigel Farage is obviously going to be in government in 20 years' time.
Oh,
if
don't
government
even
exists
joke.
in 20 years' time. But this is the point. When you write laws that are so vague that they can be misapplied like this, you're giving future governments that may be worse carte blanche to do whatever they like. And it's really, really dangerous. I mean, it was the Blair government that passed that law. So, you know, what are we expecting?
Yeah, what a surprise. So we will come back to Palestine Action in a moment and particularly talk a little bit about a kind of a Christian response to that and think about how churches have responded, which is to say, badly. But before we do that, Adam, would you like to hear about a Saint of the Week?
Oh, if I must.
Saint of the Week.
I need more enthusiasm from you.
Oh, if I must?
Perfect, you nailed it. So we're going to talk about the Reverend Andrew Hake. So Andrew Hake was born in Bristol in 1925. He went to private school, then Cambridge, and then the army, before being ordained in the Church of England in 1951.
Heresy! Remove this filth!
Yeah, not exactly a biography that suggests someone who's going to develop radical politics, right?
This has not started well. I'm not liking this. How are you gonna pull this back? Because you're pretty low at the moment.
So, while he was a curate, he was on a Bristol council estate. And prior to the Bristol bus boycott, he challenged both the bus company and the union over the kind of policy of not hiring black staff. And he kind of described how he felt no one was really interested, and that the only people in the union who cared about it were Christians and communists. And what I enjoy about that quote from him is that at no point does he define which of those he's referring to himself as. And as we will come to see, as we will come to see, it is distinctly possible he was in both camps. So in 1957, he is invited by the Christian Council of Kenya to become an urban and industrial advisor in Nairobi. And while he's there, he becomes involved in the anti-colonial movement. And he advocated for the independence of African nations, which at this time was an extraordinarily rare position for a white person to take, particularly of his kind of class and status. For him to be advocating for that is actually quite a notable thing. He was quite heavily involved in advocating for the release of Jomo Kenyatta, who was eventually the first president of Kenya, but at this point was imprisoned as an independent advocate.
I mean, we're talking. Sorry to interject here, but did you say 1957?
Yeah.
Because what are we, 5 years after the Mau Mau uprising at this point, which is, so it's like a powder keg, presumably.
Yes. Yeah.
Really interesting time to be in Kenya. Did they get? Was it about 1960 that Kenya got independence?
It's sometime around. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But yeah, he was heavily involved in the independence movement, and again, for a white person, a white Englishman of his kind of station, to be publicly and heavily involved in the independence movement is quite remarkable, actually. He and his wife Jean lived in an area where white people were a tiny minority, and when people questioned them about this, they said, "Where else would we live if we want to develop Africans as leaders?" And they were very committed to that indigenous leadership kind of thing. He ended up actually being a city councillor in Nairobi, and he worked really hard on super low cost housing for people. So essentially replacing slums with kind of very basic shelters that had kind of basic sanitary, running water, and whatever at an extraordinarily low price, so that people could afford to not kind of live in the slums and the kind of health issues that are associated with that. But it also allowed them to stay in the same area rather than having to kind of move out and break up those communities.
God, we need this guy in Britain right now, don't we?
Yeah. He wrote a couple of books in this time, one of which was about advocating for anti-colonial African independence, and the other which was advocating for public ownership of industry. In 69,
Communism.
in 69, after 12 years there, they decided to leave because they felt that it was time for the local leaders to take over. And they were actually, Kenyans there begged them to stay, and they said, no, as long as we're here, the local leaders are not going to be able to take over. We've done what we've needed to do in terms of developing Indigenous leadership. We now need to leave to allow that Indigenous leadership to take on the mantle of what needs to come next, which I just think is really cool.
That is really forward thinking for that time, by the way.
In 69, yeah.
That's not everyone was thinking that way. Still not thinking that way, a lot of them. So
after his curacy, he was actually never employed as a minister again. He carried on as a Church of England priest, but he was never actually employed in a job role as a minister after his curacy.
That almost feels like an air horns moment.
Yeah. He did various stuff around social action, community work. I refer to him as the Reverend Andrew Hake, which is actually not nice because he didn't like to use he would not be referred to himself as a reverend. He didn't want people to call him reverend.
Did he use father, or did he just go with nothing?
Nothing. He didn't like titles, and he almost never wore a dog collar, for much the same reason, because he felt it was kind of putting him kind of at a distance from people. There's a story that he and Jean were at a church event, and one of the people there asked the pair of them what the two of them could do for the people there, and Jean replied, nothing. And then went on to say, like, actually, if you can come up with ideas yourself, we're here to support you, but we're not doing anything for you. That's not how this works. We're here to support you and encourage you and resource you, but you need to be the people driving this stuff.
Love it.
He finished his working life in Swindon. He worked as a community development officer for the council. In his time there, he managed to get grants to local voluntary organisations more than doubled, and he continued to do a lot of advocating for various marginalised groups in Swindon. There's a quote from a councillor saying Hake could drive you wild through his bubbling ideas that made your brain ache. Which is just really great. He was actually involved in the Faith in the City report. It's obviously quite. We won't go into it here, but that was quite a big deal at the time. And he continued to kind of work pushing the church, particularly in retirement, pushing the church towards greater engagement with marginalised communities. And he died in 2003. So yeah, a really cool guy. And I felt that his life seems to be defined by that act of giving up power. That refusal to wear a dog collar or go by reverend, that decision to leave Kenya to let the Indigenous leaders take over, the decision to say to people, I'm here to support you, but you need to do stuff for yourself with our support. He could have taken a very different approach and still done some good stuff, but actually it seems that the value that he really had, that kind of giving up of power in that Christ-like way, I thought was really cool. And as you've kind of mentioned a few times, a man well ahead of his era, well ahead of the thinking at the time in his kind of not just commitment to anti-colonialism as a large struggle, but his commitment on an individual basis to that giving up of power and that kind of challenging his own position of power and authority. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've reflected on as well a lot as someone who very nearly became a minister of the cloth, is that relationship to power, because you have power whether you want it or not. You can reject it as much as you want, but often you have to find ways to give it away, and that is, I think, an imperfect solution to the issue of having power thrust upon you. What you should ultimately be driving towards is collective power, no individual power, but collective power, I think communal power. But yeah, I think all the time you're sort of not quite there. I think you've got to find ways to give that power away. So it's nice to hear of people doing that who have been doing that for a long time.
Saint of the week.
Do you know who turns out to be a real wanker? The head of the Met Police.
Oh, I was gonna take a guess, but I think we've spoken about him before.
News.
I think we've had brief discussions about Sir Mark Rowley before.
What I find really fascinating is the extent to which he has felt comfortable taking an actively political stance.
Yeah,
he has explicitly requested that Palestine Action be prescribed.
Yeah,
which is an interference from the head of the most powerful police force in the country in a political process that, if you believe in any sort of, democracy, seems like a gross overstepping of the boundaries.
I mean, which
I'm not shocked by it, obviously. It's not news.
Mark Rowley in particular, when he became commissioner of the Met, I think I said on this podcast what an awful, awful decision that was. This guy I think he was commissioner of the Northern Irish Police Service before that.
So he's head of an occupying army, got it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously all police officers are part of an occupying army, regardless of where they do it. But yeah, in Northern Ireland, or as we like to call it, occupied Ireland, it's a little bit more problematic even than it is elsewhere. So, yeah, are we surprised? No, we're not. Mark Rowley pushed for this to happen. And Mark Rowley released a wonderful statement when Palestine Action called for an emergency protest when this was announced.
Yes, would you like to hear some of that statement?
Yeah, what fun we're going to have. Yeah, go on.
I'm sure many people will be as shocked and frustrated as I am to see a protest taking place tomorrow in support of Palestine Action. This is an organised extremist criminal group whose prescription as terrorists is being actively considered. I want to pause there and say, I think that might be slander or libel if it's a statement.
I don't know if you saw how Palestine Action responded to this, but they said that if the government had ever allowed them to have any legitimacy, the kind of legitimacy that they sort of do have inherently, that Mark Rowley would be being sued right now. Which I really enjoy as a response, because I think it occurred to me that a lot of the things in this statement that Mark Rowley says you could easily apply to the Met Police as well. There's a strong case for that.
Oh, yeah.
A stronger case than there is for prescribing Palestine Action, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's pretty inarguable at this point. For a start, Palestine Action are non-violent and haven't ever killed anyone for the colour of their skin. So
exactly.
Part of his statement as well accuses Palestine Action of attacking a police officer with a sledgehammer. We all know that when the police report injuries, attacked with a sledgehammer means there was a sledgehammer within 100 metres of a police officer.
Police probably brought it,
There was certainly, the protest he's referring to, it was direct action on an Elbit Systems building. There were sledgehammers there as part of the direct action. But Palestine Action are explicitly a non-violent group. They are trained and disciplined in not acting in any way physically violent towards human beings. Who do we believe when it comes to the question of whether a police officer was attacked? Palestine Action, who have always been quite honest about what their aims are and aiming to achieve, or the Met Police, who lie pretty much constantly about everything just for the sheer hell of it?
I choose to believe the ones that are an organised criminal gang.
I personally choose to believe our brave boys in blue, but that's, I guess, just my...
So the organised criminal gang, then?
There were a bunch of stuff done to prevent the emergency protest. They put a bunch of conditions in, essentially in a pretty obvious attempt to prevent the protest happening. It did have to be moved, but it did happen, thankfully. And there were a number of smaller protests around the country.
And they only gave them 3 hours, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
12 to 3, and then moved in to start arresting people.
It was pretty blatant that they were trying to prevent a protest from happening, which, again, am I surprised? No. But actually, if you believe in democracy and the right to free speech, even if you think that Palestine Action should be prescribed and that the people who broke into Bryce Norton should be thrown into jail forever, if you believe in free speech and democracy in any sense, you should be upset that a protest about a explicitly political issue, Parliament deciding whether to prescribe an organisation, was essentially curtailed and attempted to be gotten rid of by the police force. That is an obviously outrageous attempt to silence free speech.
And also on the topic of free speech as well, the prescription of Palestine Action stops you not only being a member of Palestine Action, but of, supporting it, whatever that means, right? So if you express sympathy with their cause, you express sympathy with their action, like their tactics. If you, and this is where it gets really dangerous. I mean, it's already really dangerous. But if you say something that could be interpreted by someone in a way that causes them to be more likely to themselves go and join that group, you have committed an offence against the Terrorism Act. That is insane. And where the fuck are the free speech warriors now? Where are they? I can't see any.
No, of course not.
It's almost like the free speech warriors don't really believe in free speech.
Which, again, we're not shocked by, but my God, it's so blatant with stuff like this. Amnesty made this point as well. It should be remembered that prescribing Palestine Action not only makes membership in the organisation a criminal offence, through broadly worded speech offences such as glorification, it puts at risk the free speech rights of many other activists who are deeply concerned about the plight of Palestinians in the context of Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. It is a clear free speech issue, and it's clear that there is an establishment political force comprising of the government and the police attempting to prevent legitimate forms of protest in order to shut down debate about the fact that we, as a country, as a government, are actively supporting the perpetration of a genocide. And I can't emphasize that enough. That's what these protests are about. Not that Israel is committing a genocide, but very specifically that the British government that supposedly represents you and me is actively aiding and abetting a genocide.
And this is the thing, by the letter of the law, international law, Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Yvette Cooper, they belong in The Hague. Like by the letter of international law, that is where they belong.
Yeah.
And I think this smacks of desperation, actually. I mean, I don't think those people are ever going to see the inside of a courtroom from
Tony fucking Blair hasn't, so I mean, what help is there for anyone else?
Exactly. But that's the thing. When you reach that kind of power, you become almost untouchable if you are part of the kind of Western hegemonic order. So no, they're never going to see any justice for this on this side of eternity anyway. But there is an element, it seems to me, of desperation about this, because they know that they are morally, like they know what's going on, right? They know they are in the wrong. They know a genocide is being committed, and they know that they are on the wrong side of that genocide. Now, whether or not they feel bad about that, which I very much doubt, but whether or not they feel bad about that isn't really the issue. I don't really care how you feel. Like, because Tony Blair goes around now saying, oh, I feel sorry. I feel more sorry than people really. I don't give a fuck how you feel.
Yeah.
Get yourself to The Hague and hand yourself in. You know?
Yeah, take responsibility. If you're feeling bad, then do something about it.
Yeah. But even he still goes around. Yeah, he says he feels sorry for it, but he still says that he did the right thing. So, how sorry does he really feel?
With all this going on, you have to assume that the Church in the UK has taken a firm stance against the erosion of democracy and free speech. Not a single.
Have you
church
you found anything?
No, I found, and I spent quite a while looking. No major church.
There are obviously individual Christians, and some of them ordained, who say, "Oh, this is a terrible thing."
Yeah, and again, we're not even asking in this specific incident churches to make a statement saying they condemn Israel's actions in Gaza. They should do that, obviously, but they can't even bring themselves to condemn the curtailing of people's protest rights.
We're not even asking them to put out a statement saying that they agree with Palestine Action's
No.
actions.
Just that they defend the right for them to have a protest.
Well, and even that, In fact, you don't even need that. All you need is to say that these people are not terrorists. That's it.
And I think, it's almost a trite point, and we love saying it, but actually, if Palestine Action are terrorists and beyond the pale, like, so is Jesus, quite clearly and explicitly, and so are most of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible. So are a number of the kind of early church apostles. This is, we talk about Jesus in the temple. The distinction between what Jesus did in the temple and what Palestine Action did is purely one of context, not of action, right? It is exactly the same. The machinery of establishment being purposefully sabotaged by someone to make a political point about the oppression of people. If Palestine Action are terrorists, then Jesus is a terrorist. And if I were a church, it might concern me that my government was calling Jesus a terrorist. Personally speaking, I think I would probably have a bit of an issue with that, and maybe would want to say something about it.
Maybe it's time to reclaim the term, Ben.
Are you suggesting that we change our Jesus is a communist t-shirts to say Jesus is a terrorist?
Limited edition until we get nicked.
Yeah, proscribing bread and rosaries through Parliament.
I would be so happy if they did that.
I think it would be very cool and very funny. It would also probably cause me some work-related issues.
It would cause us both some issues beyond work, I should think, as well.
Well, yes. Staying out of jail for a start would be, nice.
All we need to do is we need to get on Mark Rowley's radar. That's what we need to do, because then he'll push the government to prescribe us.
Yeah, I don't want to get on Mark Rowley's radar because I don't know if you know this about him, but he has the ability to send people to kill you, and I don't want that. So yeah, probably going to avoid getting on Mr. Rowley's radar if I can avoid it. But yeah, I'm not shocked, not really, but there is such a long tradition of Christian direct action, going back, as I say, to Jesus himself, to the prophets of the Hebrew Bible,
and specifically non-violent direct action as well. This is what we're talking about here. This is why this is so mad, because we are talking about non-violent direct action,
which I think is arguably, if you want to go around calling things this, which I'm not sure I do, but if you are the sort of person who likes to call things this, it is clearly the most Christian form of engagement with politics. It is clearly the most biblical form of engagement with politics. Now, I don't think those are helpful terms necessarily, or how I would like to judge things. But if you're inclined that way to think about things in those terms, it is inarguable that the form of political engagement most clearly advocated by the Bible and by Jesus is the non-violent direct action approach. That is inarguably the way of Christ.
And it's the way of the prophets. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's such a long history of this beyond the Bible as well.
Sure.
That just churches need to do better. You need to do better. This is not good enough.
And I think this is such a clear example of, as I say, we're not asking them to directly call what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide. We're not asking them to say Palestine Action were right in what they did. We're just asking them to defend the right of people to take the most Christian approach to politics. And they're not going to because
they're sold out to the state. Like, that's what Christianity is at this point. It's sold out to the state.
Yeah, I think that's hard to argue with. And I think more importantly, it's disconnected from what it actually means to be a Christian in a political system like this, right? And I think, we talked at the start about assisted dying and abortion and the mobilization of the Christian right against those things. And I think that's awful. I think that, these people are ghouls trying to limit bodily autonomy for all people. However, at least they can actually fucking mobilize for a political cause. Whereas the liberals of the church, using that term broadly, are just incapable of taking what, to my mind, is a really basic Christian stance on this, which is you have the right to engage in a Christ-like approach to politics.
But they just never will. And this is why, look, I know I'm about to, this is a very cliched thing to do, but a big part of the reason the Nazis were able to rise to power is because the church did absolutely nothing and indeed sided with them, right?
Yeah.
Even when it was slightly distasteful to them, ultimately they sided with the Nazis, except for the sort of few that were in the confessing church and whatever. But like the vast majority of the church, that's what they did.
And I don't like the confessing church, do you know? Like, they are basically liberal conservatives, the confessing church, by and large. They are not, Karl Barth is not someone I got a lot of time for, but we don't even have those people left.
We need to do an episode about Karl Barth, because I think you're slightly meaner about him than you should be. But I get it, because I'm not, there are issues, but like...
But I think my point is that actually that confessing church, the Barth stuff, all that stuff, is not radical politics. It's not radical left-wing Christianity. It's just basic decency, basic understanding of what it means to be a Christian, and we don't even have that.
I mean, even Bonhoeffer is not. I think there's radical elements to him,
but he's not a radical leftist. He's not. He's well to the right of us.
Absolutely, and I would, I'm not slandering the guy or anything.
No.
By saying that, but like he went to the gallows for opposing the Nazis. How many Christians would do that?
And I think, you kind of said this is a bit of a cliche, and I kind of said the same about talking about Christ in the temple, right? And I think we're both a bit like, oh, this is so obvious or so cliche. Oh, this is what lefty Christians always say. But the reason it's such a cliche is it's really obvious and basic. And I think that's what gets me.
Not obvious to everyone, though, is it? That's the thing.
Well, yeah, but I think that's what gets me is that, like, what we're talking about here is not a complicated or even particularly radical theological idea, right? These are a basic understanding of who Christ was, of the witness of the prophets in the Old Testament, like in the Hebrew Bible. These are the history of what it means to be a Christian in the most basic sense. And if we're making cliche, obvious, basic points, it's because it's so clear and obvious, at least to us and to anyone, I think, with a modicum of sense and seriousness about their faith, that the right thing to do here is to stand up for Palestine Action and for activists that are opposing death, right? And again, I mentioned the abortion and assisted dying earlier, right? And the phrase that I've seen a few times is a culture of death. Well, I'm sorry, but what's more of a culture of death than a genocide? Than the active support of a genocide that's happening right now. That is your culture of death for you. Not allowing people basic rights over their body, but actively supporting the decimation of a people by a military superpower. If you want to oppose unchristian stuff, that's where you need to be starting. And I just feel like we're going in circles a little bit because there's not a lot of depth to it. There's not a whole lot to say other than be Christian about this.
And there are Christians who I don't know if the Quakers put anything out about this. Actually, I didn't look for them, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Quakers have had something to say on this. But there are Christians who are good on this. It's just that there are so few of them. So the Guardian and the Guardian is not a left-wing rag at this point, not even close. But they had a decent take on it. And their take, I think their headline was, if spraying red paint is terrorism, then what isn't terrorism, or something like that. And you've got to wonder, like, when you bring Quakers into it, are they going to be the next ones proscribed? Right? Because Quakers have a long history of peace activism, of non-violent direct action.
So that's interesting because I looked yesterday and there wasn't anything. Today, as we record, on the day we recorded, the Quakers have put a statement out. So as far as I can tell, they're the only major Christian organisation. So this is Oliver Robertson, who is the head of witness and worship for the Quakers in Britain. As Quakers, our faith sometimes leads us to act against unjust laws and actions and be held accountable for that. There are Quakers who have participated in or supported non-violent direct action for various causes as part of living out their faith, but they have always done so with a firm commitment to non-violence. Prescription interferes with our freedom of religion, as well as the freedom of conscience and the right to assembly that all people have, regardless of their motivation for acting. This is not a name, this is talking about the Palestine Action, associated with extremism or violence. Much to the contrary, it seeks to stop state violence being committed against Palestinians on an industrial scale. So, fair play to the Quakers, and I think there are other Christian churches in this country that need to follow their lead. And I think, really great to see them specifically say this is infringing on our freedom of religion.
Yeah. I'm just sort of looking up to get sort of more recent stuff from other churches, but I can't see anything from any others actually. So good, well done, the Quakers.
And I will also say I'm a big fan of Sabeel Kairos, but they've not put anything out either, which I was really disappointed by.
I mean, they may do. Sometimes it takes a bit of time, but you would expect, particularly with an organisation that is, I think maybe they have like 1 or 2 paid members of staff, but like. Mm-hmm. You'd expect organisations like the Church of England, like the Methodist Church, they have the
media teams.
Yeah, they have entire media teams who can do this stuff, and they're not. And that is, frankly, disgraceful. So, do better.
I think that is probably about all we have time to say. This is always going to be just us getting increasingly mad about various things. But I hope that actually, if you're a Christian listening to this, as maddened as we were, that you maybe feel a little bit less alone and know that there are plenty of us out there appalled by the state of Christianity and the organised church in the UK on this issue. Big love and solidarity to everyone involved in Palestine Action. Of course, that is neither of us. No one involved in Bread and Rosaries is going to cop to any of that. Thank you very much.
No, we are until Monday. Now... Palestine Action all the way for the win. We love you. We are behind you. After Monday, though, terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awful. Don't support them. Don't go to their website. What is their website? We'll link the website you must not go to in the show notes.
Just to make sure you avoid it.
Yeah, just so you know which website not to go to.
But yes, I think that will do us for today. Thank you very much for sticking with us, everyone. Adam, where in the world can people find you?
You can find me at HMP Belmarsh, I should think. I don't know if Belmarsh is the right kind of prison, to be honest, but you can find me most places at Commie XIAN.
Thank you very much for listening to us. If you have any thoughts, questions, ideas, gentle, kind criticism, any of those things, we love to hear from people. Please do get in touch. All the content details are on the website at breadandrosaries.com. Would love you to leave reviews on whatever podcast platform you use. That's really helpful, helping people find the podcast. And if you have a few spare pennies you want to chuck us, there is a Patreon as well. However, in this case, I would say your first priority is to give money towards Palestine Action's legal defence. And then if you've got any left over, chuck it our way. Thank you very much, Adam, for having this quite angry but I think cathartic conversation with me. And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
See you later.